Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and to many of you, welcome back. It's lovely to see you here on this wet and miserable day, in this rather wet and miserable week. But hopefully the sound that you've been hearing, even though it's full of melancholy and longing, is also in a way uplifting. The sound, of course, is Bani Abidi's Memorial to Lost Words. I'm not going to talk about it, because that's what Bani, the artist here, will do with Professor Nirmal Puwar from Goldsmiths. But I do want to put just 2 minutes of your time to put something in context. So Bani, this is not her first gig at Ibraaz. Bani also kicked off our film program in December with a little micro-retrospective of 7 films crossing 25 years of practice. And then she also has curated a series of films for us called Wildfire, with this idea of the cleansing and the spread, the power of friendship. So thinking about curating friends. And the first one was kicked off in December with 5 filmmakers from Berlin. And this Sunday at 2 p.m. is the Wildfire 2. And it will feature films by Hira Nabi and Shahana Rajani. So 3 films, do not miss it. Okay? So it will be here this Sunday. And then there will be a Wildfire 3, date to be determined. If you haven't yet, please log on to the the Ibraaz website, subscribe to our newsletter, and you will hear all about what is to come. There's also, if you don't get enough of Bani today, there's also a podcast available on the website where she talks about actually that idea of friendship as practice, covering that time period. One final thing is, this is called the Majlis in Ibraaz, and Majlis for many of you, I'm sure, is not an unfamiliar word. It is shared in the Arabic also with Jalsa, and so Majlis is a place to gather, but Jalsa is a procession, and this is again a thing that both Bani and Bani's practice, and I think Ibraaz share in common, that idea of being a gathering of gatherings. And we are gathered here today in an artwork. This is Ibrahim Mahama's Parliament of Ghosts. You can read all about it later on. I'm not going to repeat that here. But one thing I will share is that for me, I think this idea of ghosts is so powerful, in that depending on which part of the world you come from, you may perhaps be thinking of either trying to bust them or exorcise them, or otherwise giving them libations and offerings. And I see in this project of Ibrahim's an invitation for us to think about how we turn our ghosts into guests, how we live with them, and if we do that, what we're doing really is figuring out probably our biggest planetary problem, which is how do we share place and histories. With that, I'm going to turn over to Nirmal and Bani to take it away. The conversation will be for about 45 minutes, and then we will have time for Q&A on this format, and then the sound will be turned on, so then you can enjoy the work again. But Bani and Nirmal will be here and available to speak to you one-on-one if you wish to linger. With that, thank you for coming, and over to you.
Just like to say thank you to Hamad for making this space for us, for making it a place of possibility, and for actually creating a gathering in central London. It's not that easy to do. But also this particular encounter that we have here of 2 pieces of work interacting often with each other. So I'm going to start with a question to Bani, to situate the work, so that she can help us understand how it started, what the idea behind it was. Bani, letters have been central to the work.
So this was actually, it's from 2016, and so it was very located in a particular moment in history, which was the centenary of the First World War. And what it is, for people who haven't read the didactic text, is it's a letter written by an Indian soldier posted in Iraq in 1914, and he's writing to his family. And it's a folk song that was sung by women at that time in India, that those were songs of resistance. So it's very located in the history of men and women, Indian men and women during the First World War. And it's very unlike the rest of my work. I do film and photography and drawing, and I'm sort of interested in the ideas of nation states and power and how to kind of dismantle that. So like some interesting projects that happen in one's career, this was an invitation, and it was the Edinburgh Arts Festival in 2016, and the curatorial theme that was proposed by the curator Soraka Carey was it was called More Lasting Than Bronze. And it was about because Edinburgh is a city with about 200 monuments apparently and memorials. Her question was about what is the efficacy and meaning of brick and mortar monuments? And 6 artists were invited to create an anti-monument. And it just so happened that I was thinking about these characters and soldiers because I was also working on for another exhibition that had to do with World War I. So that kind of intellectual preoccupation, plus going to the parliament in the old parliament in Edinburgh that was never used as a parliament. I entered that space, and it kind of really immediately I felt, okay, it needs to be a sound installation, which I had never done, and there needs to be some kind of representation of voices. So it comes about then. Her invitation had nothing to do with the World War history, but the 2 things that led me to decide on the content and the nature of the work was, one is that outside of Berlin, there's a big prisoner of war camp, which is now, there's no site of that, but there's only a graveyard. And all the prisoners of war that were South Asian and from the Middle East were brought there in the First World War. And the very interesting thing that I was just telling the group, a museum group earlier, was that they tried to kind of palpate the imagination of young Muslim soldiers into fighting for the Ottomans, and saying that there was a letter that came out that was called El Jihad from Berlin. So as early as that, it was jihad, the idea of jihad was being used by imperial powers to get people, and then of course the history of Afghanistan is all about that. Anyway, these young boys are completely exhausted, and they're living in this camp, and they didn't fall for that. And there was a Turkish mosque also made out of wood and things. The moment that project collapsed, they turned it into a human zoo. And so people would come, and that was very common at that time. So people would come and just stare at all of these people doing their whatever, performing, and watching them live. But one of the things that happened was that there was a linguist called Willem Durgen, who was, of course, he was studying language. So he had recorded about, I think, 500 to 700 men speaking, singing, speaking, performing into this shellac kind of, sorry, that's my phone. You can just turn it off? Yes, okay, sorry about that. So it was, he was recording these different dialects, because they're from Nepal, Sri Lanka, everywhere, the whole of South Asia. And he recorded them and the idea was, of course, to study and also about how to teach languages. And it was just the empire building at that time. But those records that were made at that time just went into the archives. And they were kind of unearthed in the 1980s. It's called the Laut Archive at Humboldt University. And then people started listening to them, people who understood Punjabi and other languages, and became clear that a lot of those recordings were SOS messages by these young men, whether they were kind of encased or within poems and they were alluding to escape, or direct messages. Some of them are all about, wanting lassi from in their home in Punjab, and so it's very, very, but all of these men were either dead or had returned to India. So it was these ghostly voices that were never heard at the time. So that was one thing why I was interested in the idea of voice. The second was that I was reading David Omissy's book, which is The Indian Voices of the Great War, which is a beautiful book. And it's a tracking from the British Library. It's looking at letters that were written where people were kind of talking about how the despair and the horror of being here. And those letters were censored, they never reached home, because the French and the English censors would go through them. So it was the idea that there was, how do you bring back somehow 100 years later a memory of an entire discourse or an opposition to war that was buried. So that was the long, but those are the things that inspired me.
So David's book on the Indian soldiers has been critical because of these letters. Anyone can go and look at them. They're in the British Library, in the India office. These censored letters, I think there's 4,000 pages. And there are only a fraction of the letters that the Indian soldiers wrote from France, and as well as from Brighton, where they were taken for, when they were injured. And often, once they were injured, they'd also be sent back after the hospital. They'd be sent back to the war front. And I think David's book has 650 of these letters. However, I found that they were 20,000 letters a week in 1915 were being sent by Indian soldiers. Now, many of them made it home, but they were monitored by the censor. They were monitored, and what we have is summaries, actually. We don't have the actual letters.
We don't have the actual language, because scribes were writing them, but they were being translated for censorship.
Yes.
So
those letters were very influential in your work.
Yes. And I think that was also, that's why I asked, the letter that is here, that is being sung, is actually a contemporary rendition, and it's been written by the poet and thinker Amarjit Chandan, who is based in London. And I commissioned him to write a poem, because he's also very, very informed about that period, and he has his own archive. So he wrote it, and that was really, really interesting for me. And the folk songs, of course, are something that he also has a lot of information about. But what we don't know, and that's a lesser of a recorded archive, is that women, all the folk songs of that time were kind of longing for the men who had left. And this one, I'm particularly moved by this one, because it says that, God will give you what you need in your own land, but it says very precisely that stay in the shade of your own land. And talking about shade as the ultimate source of comfort is such a South Asian concept, because of course people here or in Berlin don't get the idea. We're stepping out of blazing hot sun. So I find it so touching, that kind of the use of words in that.
Yeah, so those Boliyan you actually managed to access through Amarjit?
Through Amarjit,
Yeah, Amarjit Chandan, who's a well-known poet, lives in London.
And then the people who are the women who are singing it is a group of women. It's a family. It's 3 sisters, and they're called Harsakhiyan. They're based in Lahore, And the guy is Ali Aftab Said, and so they're also very particularly chosen for having certain kinds of voices. And that the entire work was produced, recorded, and arranged in Lahore. And it was funny because Amarjit Chandan wrote in Gurmukhi. Ali didn't understand Gurmukhi because he's Pakistani Punjabi. And so there was this whole communication on FaceTime, figuring out how to get the words right. And it was quite a lovely process of producing it.
Yeah, and it's very architectural, isn't it? The way you install the work.
Yeah.
You have a call and response between these different layers. How did you come to conceive it in that pattern?
But I think the architecture of the parliament was such also that I wanted women to be on one side, and also just having in the middle of Edinburgh, having Punjabi voices sitting in the parliament. It was, of course, in sound has that magic of you can, a voice can inhabit just by its presence a space. And of course, if you're standing there and you're listening to all of these voices, you can conjure up a world of who are these characters around me. So it was definitely that, and also because I found out, I discovered about what kind of resistance there was to this entire movement of young boys coming from their mothers and sisters. So of course that had to be included in the narrative. And I was just telling you that there's a beautiful book written by Abdullah Hussain, who's a Pakistani writer, and he was based in London, in fact. And it's called, in English, it's called The Varied Generations, Udas Naslein in Urdu. But he writes a novel which is first half of the 20th century, but there's really heartbreaking descriptions of these young boys who are actually forced by the landlords or the kind of people who held power in their villages to go for war, because that was kind of a negotiation with the British. So they were literally herded off, and then went to Bombay, arrived in Marseille. And so a lot of the songs that the letters that you hear, are also just these very visceral descriptions of the pain, and also excitement. Like suddenly there are lots of white women, and there's like this is adventurism of young boys, but then there's a lot of talk about homesickness, but also the conditions in the trenches were really awful. So they didn't even have proper boots, it's winter. So there was a lot of literature around it, but I think that important thing which is the most shocking thing, is that in the Imperial War Museum, when I was researching this, there's not even a single mention of the million men. I think I saw one photograph of a Sikh soldier, and that was really the only mention. So it was so, when you go from another space where you're actually drawn into this history, which I wasn't interested in, of the war, but through soldiers, and then you go to the museum where it's supposed to be sitting, the history, and then it's as if it was just an absolutely insignificant part of empire and victory of any kind.
Yeah, it's produced all the time, isn't it? That sort of, I guess, what Stuart Hall might call amnesia or erasure of empire. And it's becoming particularly pertinent now, as this sort of purist notion of the nation just erases, the contributions, the sacrifices, or not even sacrifices, the deaths, from World War I onwards. But these wars get claimed, especially World War I and II, as exclusive British or European. And these other figures are just an annoyance, a kind of the noise of the past.
They're the foot soldiers, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that what is really also heartbreaking is that when I grew up with histories of any kind of information or exposure I had to the history of the war was where people would be extremely proud of the fact that their grandfathers had fought and maybe died, or there were medals. So it was all about, we were so loyal. And so just to switch to the side where maybe this should have never happened was not even a consideration, because you're always kind of following in the footsteps of like trying to get, some form of validation.
Yeah, that's sort
And
of,
I think in England also the Sikh community commemorates it only in terms of, I don't know how critical it is, the memory of the war.
there's certainly a tradition that's very pro-establishment, so it does want to be included in the big institutions as, you know, we were there as the sort of mythical martyr race, and so it enters the establishment through certain tropes. But what you've done is pulled out those tender lives, really, and you can feel it in the letters. And some of them are pragmatic letters. I know David refers to them as pragmatic. They're actually telling their families what to do with their pension, their war pension, when they've died. Or
No, and there's simple questions like, can you guide me of which side my head should face? A Muslim is saying, should it face Makkah? Should it face the Kaaba? And so it's, what is the technical things? Or send me a taweez, I lost mine in the war. Or send me a flute because I'm so lonely. And they're really, of course, heartbreaking.
yeah.
But I think that we can talk about the different iterations of when it's been installed, because that's how you and I met.
Yeah, I think that's really significant. It's so responsive to the space. When I walked in today, I didn't really know what I was going to, because you hear it differently. It's very interactive and site-based, responsive. So I came across this work, a memorial to Lost Words, accidentally. Was it the second iteration when it went? It went to Coventry Cathedral. Some of you may know this cathedral. If you haven't visited it, you should. And it's a modernist building that was built after World War II. It's kind of very much about conflict, peace, reconciliation. You know, it's not settled. It's always in tension. So I had a quite difficult day in the archives there. I was looking at these kind of multicultural experiments, and I was leaving. It was a summer, wasn't it? Yeah. July. 2023. I was about to leave the building, and the entrance is a huge glass screen with Hutton's engravings of angels, saints, but some people locally say the footballers at the top, really, they're not angels. And I suddenly, my ears, kind of the periphery of my ears, heard these sounds. I couldn't actually translate them, but there was the door. I could hear, you know, the deep voices, and I said to the staff at the welcome desk, "Is there an event on? You know, is there an event on?" They have a lot of events because it's a pretty diverse city, and they said, "We don't know what's going on, but you know, we'll work it out in the morning." So I walked home for about 20 minutes, and those sounds just stayed with me in my ears, even through the night. Probably because they reminded me of my father, because he used to do Urdu poetry. He had been dead 10 years by then, but he was also a soldier in World War II in the Indian Colonial Army. And we had previously done a project in the cathedral called Noise of the Past. So it was very layered for me. And the next morning, I walked it, almost as if I was going somewhere religious, and I'm not religious. And I think I was the first person to enter the cathedral who was not part of the team. And again, I heard the sound at the glass screen, the huge glass screen. And basically my ears and my body followed the sound. And it took me to the Chapel of Industry, where you were installing it with Hamad. And the Chapel of Industry, there it took on a different iteration, because the chapel is circular and it's all glass. And you chose some of the letters. You had them typed on transparencies.
Yeah, the stickers on the glass. So
and
they were looking at the city.
They were looking at the city, because that chapel was made so that the cathedral would never be separate from the city. and then the multi-channel sound was there. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, what was the chapel was a really interesting space, also because it was challenging for sound. But I think the thing which I didn't get when in Scotland, for instance, was that of course Coventry has a huge Punjabi community. So I had Bal, who you also spoke to, who was a cleaning woman at Coventry. So first I had one of the museum directors from Herbert Museum, who was not involved in this particular exhibition, but she came to see the install. And she's a white British lady, and she was interested in what's she saw such interesting stories, and I immediately said to her, it's not a story, it's your history. So there was that kind of slightly disembodied, like, how interesting. And then there's Bal, who is the cleaning woman, who is almost weeping because she heard it and understands it, and says, I've never heard something like this in Coventry, in this cathedral, and I'm going to make sure all my family comes and everyone else in the community, I'll bring them. And in the evening, I opened the installation, and I spoke a bit about it, about the letters and all of the boys, and describe it a bit. And she's really sweet, and she came up, she said, it's because you're a woman that you are so interested and so sensitive towards the injustice of men fighting and what their humanity is and the details of their feelings, because men can't stop celebrating war. And it was the only really interesting comment, again, that I got. And I was like, thank you for that observation. And I was really moved by that. So yeah, it was a very, very, I think for me, the fact that a lot of Punjabi-speaking people came and listened was really meaningful. And of course, the other installation that I did of it, which was quite funny, was at the Punjab Museum. The Armory in Lahore has the statue of Queen Victoria, which is a very dark, black, big statue. And it used to be out in the city, and it sits in the Armory now. And for the first Lahore Biennial, I was invited to show this work, and I surrounded her statue with speakers. So they were everyone was singing at her. So that was, everyone got the humor. And again, it was interesting that because it's Punjabi, and somehow, I don't know, contemporary art is always in English, at least in South Asia. I think in the Middle East, there's a lot more ownership and languages, but it's somehow just kind of transported, and a lot of didactic texts are always in English. So people don't play with local languages, and it's also maybe to do with the class of the people who make it, who are slightly disconnected. But when I showed it in Lahore, I had suddenly had all these, Lahori aunties and uncles befriending me on Facebook. So I definitely had reached a very, very different audience by having something which is emotive, but also in a language or in a musical arrangement that is very familiar to people.
Yes, yes. I think the cathedral didn't go looking for the Punjabi population. We just all texted each other, and everyone was saying, you better go, and you know how people leave it. I remember going on the last day, there were so many people in that space. But people also found it hard to talk to each other because the pain was deep when they were reading these letters and hearing the powerful sound. And yes, Bal, who works at the cathedral, keeps the cathedral clean. I actually had a conversation with her for a long duration a couple of days ago. We went back into the Chapel of Industry, and she said to me, there are so many healing elements to this installation that we had. And she said the voices that were lost, the light from the sun was coming through their words into the chapel. And yes, and she said most people don't understand how young these men were. And she was also thinking about, she has a son, and for many years she couldn't see him. So she was relating to the mothers, because inside the letters are the letters that the families would send to the soldiers. So they have those letters from that side as well. as you say, advising them what to do. Then the soldiers' message underneath, many times they were telling people not to join the army, not to come. So it took on a more humorous installation by the sound of it in Lahore.
In Lahore, it was different, but still also melancholic. I mean, but I think that it's also the thing that is interesting for me is talking about the oral history aspect of it, and why. And even now, of course, we're living in a moment where truth is being decimated. And so we also think about how is this moment going to live? And what are the voices that are going to carry it? So I think that part is really interesting to think about why oral history, what role does oral history play in the telling of people's history? And the music. I mean, for me, it's also very much part of growing up as a Shiite Muslim in Pakistan, and where the culture of elegiac music and witnessing and the carrying of narrative every year and the commemoration and the repetition is where the central narrative of Karbala, which is of Shiaism, is carried through. So I've grown up in a yearly ritual of commemorating through performance and grief and mourning. And I think that was really inspired me to think about this as a music form.
Yes. So this notion of carrying's pretty central to how you've made the work, in terms of what they carried, but also how you carry the work. Mm-hmm. And put it in interaction with other people's skills and aesthetics. And when you mention oral history, we actually have quite a lot of oral histories from soldiers, Asian soldiers, not Punjabi, Muslim, Sikh, and even the Herbert has a big collection. But what happens is these collections still sit on the side. They still get ignored. So telling in itself is not enough to disturb the national stories. There's other work that needs to be continuously done.
I mean, also a lot of the stuff is in archives or in personal collections. So I think it is interesting for that reason when artists are able to work with archives and bring out something and share it in a completely different form. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this had there not been the whole legacy of letters and archives that have been organized and translated by somebody else. But to create it in very different to go and listen to a crackly sound in an archive versus sitting in an immersive sound installation. So that carrying over was a stroke of luck that I had access to all of that. Yeah.
No, I think it's actually vital that artists work with it.
Yeah.
Because also you bring in a different dimension, and oral histories can, even though they're full of life, academics can sometimes actually take the vitality out of it, because they're looking for categories, they're looking for different kind of way of doing analysis. But what you've been able to do is lift and sit with the emotion. Not all academics, but generally the way in which we're trained how to write. It's for an argument, it's for a thesis. And sometimes the richness gets lost, and you've been able to stay with that, but also to grow the richness to the way you've carried it in collaboration.
Yeah, and I think that's the most promising thing about it, is that because it's sound, it can be installed in multiple places, hopefully. And I did. It's a single channel sound as well, and it's on SoundCloud. So I put it up, and it's free. Everyone downloads it. So I hear about somebody sitting in, the mountains in Pakistan on a on a dark evening listening to this and telling me I'm crying or whatever. So it's amazing how sound and song can be shared, and what is the life that I can give those memories as an artist beyond the installation only. But do you want to tell me a bit about the ladies in Coventry who also know a lot of those songs to this day?
Yes, I think some of you know that I've been obsessed with Bollian guitar from quite a young age. I'm looking at After Bra over there because she made a film with a community filmmaker, Vipin Kumar and Jasbir Banasar in 1990. And it was made by the women. They trained in filmmaking, elder women who went to Milap Day Centre. And at the end of that short film, it's 20 minutes, called Aaj Gal, which is online on the Dark Matter site. It's there, isn't it, Ash? Yeah. They are doing Bolia and Gitta.
Bolia, yeah.
Bolia and Gitta together. You know, they are full of joy. They're often risky. They're full of drag. These acts of engagement, you know, people might pick up a towel and make a turban, get the broomstick, act out the old man. So...
And where is this all Coventry? Is this
These are everywhere. So most of us grew up with these Gidda Bolia in front rooms. Usually the women would have got rid of the men to the pub and, working class lives. And then they would have basically a gig in the front room. In there are bullion of war, the ones you've picked up. You know, what the women were singing when the men were at war, and they've carried them across, countries.
Generations.
Diasporically. Yeah, I mean, I knew them as a child, but I don't know them fully. But I started listening to them more when my mother had dementia. And there's this whole, fascinating field of singing for the brain. So we started singing them and playing them again. And it does keep you in touch with your loved ones if you can sing and gesture those songs. So it's kind of still a living archive, yes. That's all over the place, all over the diaspora. But I asked a community worker in Coventry, Jiti Samara. She has a group that meets every Monday in Coventry, elder Asian women. And I said, do you think they remember these songs of war? When the men had mainly gone to War One and World Two as well, World War Two. She said, I'll ask them. She asked them, and they said, of course we do. And so we're going to record these in the cathedral to, again, change the frame of where do we hear the stories of war and what kind of mode of telling is it. And they will sing them, we will record them, and we'll find a way of sharing them. So these are still living archives that are actually yet to be registered.
It's also the history of music, because I was talking to another lady from Lahore, and she says, well, now I realize what a lot of the folk songs that say don't go, and she says now it makes sense, because a lot of the songs live in younger generations who don't necessarily link it up historically. But after she had heard this, was she able to place the very simple refrain of don't go, addressed to a man, and was able to place it. So that's also very common, of course, that there's poems and songs that one loves and sings, and you don't know precisely where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think it's the second, I see myself as second generation. The third generation are really interested in them. So when we've ever shared some of these songs publicly, third generation's really interested. It's a way of connecting to heritage in a different sense, I think, intergenerationally. And normally I think we need to recognize the gendered element. Some of these Bolia have been captured by, Bhangra groups and They put certain, I'm not being derogatory, but they put certain beats to it, and that informality of the way the women sung them or sing them gets kind of lost and dominated by a different genre of music. It's the informal side that we want to somehow address, and not only make it an archive, but in that kind of sense of a living archive that lives again and again.
I mean, I think that's why also that resonates, of course, outside of an art community, in fact, maybe more than an art community, is the fact that these are lived traditions, and music, the musical arrangement, both Ali's and her Sakhiyan, these are all recognizable rags or arrangements. So you feel them in a very embodied way, the emotion of it. So it's almost like I've kind of just slightly stepped away from what is real and lived culture and kind of represented it with a minor shift. We can, would you have any other things to bring up? Otherwise we can...
Well, there's so much to the work, we can talk at length. I think it's interesting how these letters, for instance, first they would be scribed and then they were translated. And a lot of the translators were from the Indian Civil Service, so they were British. And when you look at the letters, they even bring reference to their own literary knowledge. So some of them sound as if they're mimicking Shakespeare. So even the letters are, they're mediated. Each process has been a process of mediation, from the scribe to the translator, then, what's in the British Library. And you've mediated in a totally different direction. So you've opened it up, if you like, you've rerouted it in channels that are not normally done. And I have to say, I keep looking at, these sacks on the shelves. And the sacks we know are from women who trade in Ghana, different kinds of trade. But it so much reminds me of some of the cloth that the soldiers wore. And they actually talk about the cloth, don't they, a lot in the letters. So there's a sensory encounter here, which takes it somewhere else. And we didn't have that in the cathedral. But we did have the letters there. So each place has a different installation.
And of course, it has a different resonance and meaning if I show it in Scotland or in England or in Germany than when I show it in Bombay or in Karachi. It has a very different feeling, and I think it plays very different political roles in both places. And I haven't shown it in Karachi, for instance, or in Lahore it showed, but because there is also this remorse of the way history is commemorated, on just a kind of epiphany that people would have, their family members or just generally, of what our history has meant. And here for an audience it means very different things. Yes.
I think we'll close, but
yes.
you can come up to Bani and while you listen to the work. And thank you for coming, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.